How's everybody doing? We are doing the forum, and I didn't know if I was going to be hosting this. My hair is a little unkept. Feeling very Jackson Snyder today, and but we were talking last week about, which was I thought a great topic. We started out with the sermon by where was he from?
I
Somewhere
don't know.
But I thought it was a great sermon. I was talking to one of my friends about it this week. That in the Sunday morning mass, he was going after it, expounding the problem, in the Catholic Church, not being pedophilia so much as it is adult homosexuality. And Jackson let us listen to that, and then even shared his experience from Emory, and then also it's interesting. I've heard 2 or 3 really good sermons in the last week that are all from people that are very pro-organized, set in stone denominationalism or religion, and they all had some really good points to make. But so we talked about that, and then I know that you had some sources, Jackson, you wanted to maybe put forth here to continue the discussion.
Sure, I'll just give you the titles of a few articles that I looked at this week. I looked at a lot of them, but there's a few that caught my attention. And the first one doesn't have so much to do with homosexuality, but another kind of crisis that's happening in the Catholic Church is one particular bishop here in the United States is shocked when they had a conference on race, and he heard, as he was milling about, all kinds of racial epithets and racial jokes right in the conference that is supposed to deal with race. And so this is from the Tampa Bay. Bishop shocked at anecdotes during Catholic discussion on race. We'll go to the crisis, though. One of the big questions that keeps coming up is, can the Pope resign? And that accusers are trying to force him out, and have been, that it's a plot by more liberal Catholics to get rid of this guy. I'm sorry, more conservative Catholics to get rid of this guy. And church law says that a pope may freely resign at any time and for any reason. And that if he does resign, the Council of Cardinals is not to condemn him or try to get him to stay. So this article comes from Reuters. It's called, "Can the Pope's Accusers Force Him to Resign?" And one more is from The Guardian about the decline of the Church of England, which has declined in double digits in the last 10 years. Church in crisis, as only 2% of young adults identify as Church of England. And there's much greater this last decade in Church of England people going to atheism. That's also double digits from the last decade. And then there's an article from the New York Post. There's a judge here. This also has a little to do with church, but pot offenders can get their case dismissed by going to church. And this is concerning, in Brooklyn, a Baptist church, and a judge not only sending the minor accused of pot that got sentenced to jail to the Baptist church, but also going back into the ones that have already been sentenced to prison, and letting out something like 1,800 of them if they'll go over to the church. And it's interesting because this particular judge, actually it's a district of attorney here in Brooklyn, is shown in the picture speaking, and there is a Catholic priest in the background. In fact, a couple appear to be Catholic. And then probably the most interesting here is from the Daily Beast, the plot to bring down Pope Francis. And who they're accusing of trying to bring him down is the mafia. That might be worth looking at here just a minute. I think this is the one that's the mafia. Maybe I didn't get that one. But anyway, one of them has to do with a particular aspect of the mafia in Italy. I thought I saved that, but I don't see it here. And that this mafia has been trying to get him out ever since he's been in there because of his viewpoints, his liberal viewpoints. But evidently, what we talked about last week, that there being a wide-ranging conspiracy to get rid of this pope because he's more liberal and using about anything they could, especially this this crisis in regards to the one Archbishop McAllister, who was accused 50 years ago of meddling with a child. Now it's caught up with him, and that the Pope knew this and tried to hide it for him till finally it was revealed by Cardinal Vigano, the one that the whistleblower on this whole thing. And the Pope then resigned him from his cardinal duties, this McAllister, whatever his name is, and resigned him and sent him, commanded him to go on the rest of his life in prayer and solitude. And the guy's 88 now, so I don't know how much life he has left, but he did this as a result of the whistleblower bringing this up as the main problem with Francis, is that he covered up this particular bishop because they were friends. Oh, I wish I could find that mafia one. Well, anyway, here's just a short excerpt. Not long after Pope Francis took office in March 2013, he ran into a wall. But it wasn't the ancient Roman brickwork built around Vatican City. It was stronger. And it came from deep within the very church he was elected to lead. Is this deep church? Like deep state, deep church? Every time he tried to introduce reforms, the wall was there. His foes were so strong, he recently equated reforming the Catholic Church with cleaning the Sphinx of Egypt with a toothbrush. Still, Francis persevered, relying on his immediate popularity and innate charm. And soon the outside world began to look at the Catholic Church in a new positive light under his guidance. Suddenly, it was cool to be Catholic. But the traditional conservatives within the church didn't want to be cool, and while the new pope was hardly progressive by secular standards, they preferred the cold church, the one that protected them from the outside world behind layers of immovable doctrine. While Francis reached far into the margins to minister to the poor and disenfranchised, the conservatives preferred punishing the sinners and adhering to archaic rules that have little place in the modern world, even if it meant sacrificing the flock. I suppose what the author is talking about here is the Bible, the archaic rules, maybe church law. Francis toyed with allowing divorced and remarried Catholics to take communion. He made it okay to forgive abortion to repentant women, and he was nice to gays. And the conservatives bristled. It took 5 long years, but the conservative powers of the Catholic Church had finally begun to turn around the supertanker of support for the Pope they seemed to hate. And they did it using the one sin the whole church is guilty of, clerical sex abuse. Francis cannot be blamed for mishandling the bulk of the church's endemic sex scandals, many of which have played out in dioceses that were run by those who would like to see him resign. There has been no major sex abuse scandal in his native Argentina, at least not yet. So his naysayers have had to pick a softer target. Well, this goes on much later. It does talk about the priest or bishop's name is McCarrick. That is the name. And the whistleblower is Vigano, who was a legate to the United States and is living somewhere here in the United States, but he's hiding out right now. McCarrick is indeed 88 years old. He's been ordered to a life of prayer. Anything else here?
So the life of prayer is the punishment. Praying is punishment.
Yes. I don't know. What really brought my attention to this whole thing, actually, besides the headlines, I mean, years ago, a movie came out. It was the third in a series of 3 movies on The Godfather, Godfather 3. And that movie's been panned, of course. But for me, it was the best of all the 3 because it featured the connection between the Vatican Bank and a European country run by the mob, specifically Mikey Corleone, yes, good. And it featured some things going on in the church that, unless you knew about the Vatican, you wouldn't understand. Like, for instance, I don't know if you remember Pope John Paul, not second, but first. John Paul was in just a matter of months. And when John Paul came in, he proclaimed that it was his intention to sell off the Vatican's property and dispense that with the poor, which, that would be probably in the billions of dollars. Sell off the Vatican Library, sell off their pornography collection, sell off everything, and give it to the poor. So John Paul died suddenly, supposedly in his sleep. And of course, those of us that were watching were pretty darn sure that somebody had to murder him. And in this movie, it plays that out. Although you've got to know about this before you see it, because John Paul was a very primitive and a very true pope. It was going to lead the church back to the direction of primitive Christianity. And the people were very scared of this, including the Vatican Bank. So the way this was set up is that one of the Vatican bankers, who was one of the protagonists in this movie, had actually ordered the Pope's maid to poison his tea that he drank before he went to bed. And of course, he died. But before he died, a day or so before, Mike Corleone came to him to try to find a way to get forgiven for killing his brother. And there's a most touching scene in this movie between the mob boss that's killed all kinds of people and this righteous pope, that finally Mike thinks he's going to outsmart this pope. But the pope gets into his stuff in such a way that he has Mikey blubbering and crying out in repentance. And not only that, but when he gets absolution and leaves out, he starts undoing all the harm that he did. Now, this is something that people that don't have any clue here know what happened in the background. it's a tremendous movie, if for no other reason for that, and to see this Godfather figure turning around and renouncing, because in an earlier version, Mike Corleone is seen to be the godfather of his, I think, his sister's baby or his niece's baby. And when he goes in to stand when the baby's being baptized, the Pope, or the baptizer, of course, in Latin, asks Mikey all these questions like, you renounce Satan and all these pomps and glories, one after the other. And Michael says, I do, which were all lies, of course, because even while this baptism was happening, he was using that as an alibi for his henchmen going out and killing all kinds of other mob people. So here, to see this big turnaround and to see a pope that was actually pious and that was murdered because of what he was going to do. Well, in the end of the movie, of course, Mikey dies like his father did out in the garden. His daughter gets shot and killed on the steps of the church, steps of the church, after a marriage celebration, I think. And then the Catholic Church starts turning around. The banker is caught, commits suicide by jumping down the middle of a spiral staircase. What a scene that was, in all his robes. And the collusion that was going on between the Pope and the European Corporation is undone by Michael. But because of the subject matter, this movie was never popular. But if, in the light of these kind of scandals, though, of course, the sex scandal was not used in the movie, but now, I mean, we're seeing almost a prophetic fulfillment of what happened in Godfather 3 in real life right now. And of course, the first thing that comes to my mind here, these anti-Francis forces, which now include some parts of the mafia and lots of churches and rival bishops and everything, will he end up dead? That's my...
Can I let me do a little bunny trail if I can?
Yeah, sure.
Because we hear these things going on with the Catholic Church, and we see the different things. I've been brought up in a denomination, a particular denomination, and while there's a lot of good people in the denomination, a lot of good leaders, et cetera, my family being in that denomination for multiple successive generations, there were also some not good players in there. And so it almost brings me back to thinking about, this idea that Israel was supposed to be set apart and not be like the goy, not be like the heathen, not be like the nations in their structure and in everything. So at first, they're not even supposed to have a king. They're supposed to do things differently. They're a smaller group of people, usually, fighting against a bigger Babylon or Egypt or Syria, or the Syrians or whatever. And they're not supposed to do things in the way that the heathen structure things. And then you have, Yeshua coming on the scene and saying, the heathen lord over each other, but with you it will not be that way. For whoever wants to be, master will be servant of all, et cetera, et cetera. And so it almost is in my mind kind of pointing to this idea that once something gets so big, there's no hope for that something. Meaning you have so many moving parts. Like right now, all of us could sit here and we could say what we think is wrong with the Catholic Church, or what we think is wrong with the United States, or what we think is wrong with this para-government organization or whatever, but we would have no way to fix it. There's no way that we could, other than, being led by Yah, of course, but it's just so big and so monstrous of a design that it wouldn't even be like turning a ship slowly. It would just be impossible to turn. So then you have the Catholic Church, which is set up in a way that is able to control the populace in the sense, hey, we have a lot of Christians, let's not fight that, let's include everything else. And then it just starts snowballing and snowballing. We got this pagan religion, we'll bring this in, we'll bring that in, and it snowballs and snowballs into what it is today, which is a lot different than it looked in 325. But you know, there's something to be said, I think, even from the idea of Peter's letter to James in the Clementines, that, hey, I'm not even going to teach this stuff. I don't know if it was in this letter, or I think it was this letter, but it might have been the one from Clement to James, where it says, I'm not even going to teach this stuff to my kid if my kid is not found worthy. I'm not going to teach them the deep things. I'm not going to hand over to them the things that are of utmost importance and are super valuable, which is a lot different from let's market, let's put on the full court press to get as many adherents as we can, to get everybody in, come as you are, which is diametrically opposed to some of the idea of the original Messianic movement in Jerusalem and how they approached evangelism. Not to say that everybody's going to come in clean, completely clean. That's not it at all. But it just seems that this monolithic idea of religion is from the beginning cut off at the knees, I think, if you look at it, because there's no way that it can stay pure with that many moving parts. There's going to be people that are impure in thought and impure in deed and impure in motive, and they're going to get to the top of it if you're opening the whole thing up to everybody.
Well, there is some discussion really in the Yahad here lately that what we need to do is to go back to the first things and teach people the very elemental things of the faith and bring them in from there. But the other side says that no, what we're looking for here are people that are past that point, and rather people that maybe are post-church or post-Hebrew roots movement because they already know these elemental things, and we're not looking for them because what we teach is too deep for those people, and to bring them in or to bring Christians in would cause all kinds of problems because they're not starting at the standard that we start with. I think that goes right along with what you're saying. When we just look to get anybody in the door that we get, like my experience has been, when we do that, we'll get witches, we will get sodomites, we'll get anybody that has a notion, often from the devil, to come in there and ruin your ministry. I mean, I've had to publicly throw witches out of the congregation because they made themselves known. And yeah, they made themselves known.
You're mean, Jackson.
But the idea of the people in the church was, well, let's convert them. They're not here for that.
Right.
Same with this, same with the Catholic Church. I know the Pope, for instance, some years ago went to Haiti and gave a speech that we need to incorporate, the bottom line, we need to incorporate as much voodoo as we can into the Catholic Church so we'll get more people here. So I agree with
that. I mean, I think you're right. I think that I like, going back to the Clementines, I like how they do it where, who is it that Clement meets at first?
Barnabas.
He meets Barnabas, and Barnabas hangs out with Clement for a while, and Barnabas gets to see his life and is teaching him the elementary things one-on-one. And then when he feels like, hey, this guy can go meet Peter, then he sends him to Peter. And then Peter, even then, is not saying everything. There's a group of them.
He sends him to James.
Yes, he does send him to James.
To interrogate him and see where he's at.
Yes, so what I'm saying is there were levels of it. So it's almost like, the organization proper in these kinds of things, like we couldn't be talking about some of the things that we're talking about to a brand new person who's just out of the First Baptist Church. It's just not going to work. Their paradigm is not there. I mean, we're talking, and each of us have certain problems with some of each other's ideas, let alone somebody who's never heard any of this stuff before. So I think you're right, but I think that doesn't alleviate the personal one-on-one responsibility, although I would look at it differently than I did back when I was a Pentecostal evangelical. I was the guy that would go up to anybody and talk to you. And I lived down in Southern California for a while and go on the beach and just looking for people to talk to about Jesus. And it didn't matter who it was, persuade an atheist or help a hurting person or somebody who'd been hurt by the church or somebody who didn't realize that salvation was through Jesus or, whatever it was. I would approach anybody and everybody. And I did get to learn, like you said, there are certain people that, I think this person just wasted my time for 30 minutes and I could have went and talked to somebody else. I don't have that approach anymore at all, but I am looking for people. I'm in a few different conversations right now over the internet, mostly of people that I'm trying to give them just enough to see, maybe to wet their whistle to see if they will research it. I think that's one of the biggest problems. If you go try to tell them, stop eating pork, all your holidays are pagan, and you need to stop working on the Sabbath, I think that kills a lot of what somebody can do. But if somebody sees you, like this one person I'm talking to is a family member. I just went back for a family reunion, and I didn't talk to any of my family members about it. But they knew something was up and different things, but one of them approached me. And so because they approached me, I gave them just a little bit. And then they had some rebuttals, which I expected. And so then I gave them a little bit more. But what I'm making them do is I'm making them go and research. Because if I try to convince them, they're not going to believe me. But if they research it and they see it written and they read it, they have a much higher chance of it sticking. Especially if, they know that I'm a good orator or whatever it is, then they're going to be, doubly suspect. But if they just go read it themselves, but that makes them put time and energy in, which I think is what's missing, which is what I think Yeshua was doing with the parables. Why do you speak to them in parables? Because it has not been given to them to know the secret things, because like Isaiah said, and then he goes on, and the gist of that Isaiah prophecy is their heart is not right. We are just trying to get the people whose heart is ready for the seed. And that's why one of the parables was the parable of the seed and the sower.
So right.
Any questions on that or comments or arguments?
I was thinking that is a really good approach, but I'm wondering, I feel like that those things you mentioned, kind of those basic things and coming into understanding Torah, they can all be found in the Bible. They can read that for themselves in the Bible, but they obviously have not seen that, just like many of us. So I'm wondering if you, as you are planting seeds, give them sources or suggest sources rather than just going out and searching the internet and finding all manner of opinions.
The problem with the Bible is that if they approach people in the church about these things, they're already programmed with 3 words. That's Old Testament. Like, you dummy. That's Old Testament. That's what they always say to me when I talk to church people about it.
Yeah, I was just laughing because you're always going to get a great sentence when it starts out with the problem with the Bible is ... But anyway, I think that's a good question. I think that the people that I'm talking to right now are biblical inerrancy, right? They believe the Bible is completely without error. The Bible's sitting in their hand. And so what I do is, the more I think about it, and the more I talk about it in the last year and a half, I really have, some of it consciously, but some of it subconsciously, I have really patterned my way of teaching truth after the Peter of the Clementine homilies. To me, he is so smart in how he delineates everything and holds certain things back and then pushes things forward. And if he has a chance, he says, I probably won't talk about this, but then the crowd goes a certain way and then he ends up talking about it and different things like that. So I try to use that as a little bit of a guide, not some I don't think it's inerrant or anything like that. I think, but it's just a wise way to do things. So if I have somebody who just takes the Bible, for instance, it's and he says point blank, Simon Magus is going to come at us with the things that we know were additions to the Torah, and we have to show the people where the real Torah is. And so that's what I do. So just the last email I shot off was, they have a problem, with the food thing, and with Yeshua and Mark and Matthew saying, and he declared all foods clean or whatever. So I barely addressed that. I did address it, but my addressing of it is going to be worse for them than hitting it from another angle. So the other angle I took was I just did 5 or 6 swaths of scripture, not just like, cherry picking a verse, but swaths of scripture from Yeshua's mouth where he upholds the Torah. And then I gave them the Deuteronomy 18 about what the prophet who is going to be like Moses will be like. And I gave them Deuteronomy 13 about what a false prophet looks like. So I let them read those next to Yeshua's words. And then I just briefly come back to Mark 7 and say, look, it can't mean what you're saying it means if he is the prophet like Moses. There's no way it can mean that. If he said it, it can't even mean that he was declaring all foods clean. That's probably a scribal addition. If it's read that way, it has to be a scribal addition, or the author of Matthew putting it at the end of his words is not a quotation. And so that means it's not Yeshua's words. And if it is his words, then all it can mean is your body makes food clean, because that's the way the verbs work in the Greek. So I didn't even really hit that hard, though, because that's their sticking point. So I'm trying to pull them away from their sticking point and show them what is the truth. Here's the truth. The prophet who's going to be like Moses has to be a Torah follower. Here's Yeshua saying, follow Torah, follow Torah, follow Torah, follow Torah, follow Torah. And then you want to cherry pick one verse that you've plucked out of the middle of somewhere and say, oh, this shows that it's all done away with. So that, and the people I'm talking to are very logical thinking people. So then to me, let that work on them. I haven't even heard back from him yet. I don't know if it's going to stir up more of a hornet's nest or if it's going to, push them that way. But to me, I feel like I plant the seed and I plant it in ground that I think is good, even if it has a couple of weeds there. I'm not the judge of that, but I think it's soft enough, and then let it germinate. I don't want to germinate why you shouldn't eat meat that's not called food. I don't want to germinate why you shouldn't have a Christmas tree in your house. I don't want to germinate why you should not work on the Sabbath. I want that to germinate in them. I just want to lead them to the facts. I'm not the spirit of Elohim for them. And so to me, that's a big deal too, because we have all this knowledge and we know it because we've had to study it out. We've struggled with it. We've crossed over to the other side. And so we take that and then it's like our kids, you've studied something or struggled with something for 15 years. And then you see your kid doing it and you want them to have the same insides as you to not be able to do it. Well, come on, that's silly. It took me, we had to get on to a couple of my kids for something this last week. And it's something that seems like a big deal. And I'm thinking, man, when I was that age, I wish the worst thing I was doing is what they did. You know what I mean? So, it's a perspective thing. You can't make somebody have the same insides and the same brain as you do. So that's how I do it. That's how I do it. I don't know if that helps or if that makes it worse.
It's sure a matter of being sensitive. We get a lot of emails here from people. Well, this week, a couple, one concerning the calendar, the other concerning vegetarianism. And you've got to gauge where that person is before you can, are they ready to step over the line? If they are, then just give them the plain fact. Otherwise, if we do like so many people do say on Facebook and just blast them, or if we write a book on the right way to do it and then blast the Christians or blast certain preterists, blast these people, we're not going to get any traction with those people. But then again, there are certain what we might call elemental doctrines would be advanced doctrines for them as well. So, Rich, what do you think about the suggestion is for every Catholic priest, nun, and religious to just resign? I've seen that several times now, that suggestion. What would happen then, do you think?
Man, I think that would cause a whole lot of problems. And I'm not pro-Catholic by any stretch of the imagination. I've never been accused of that. Man, that's you have a there's a structure there, and the structure is led by certain, it's almost like AI, artificial intelligence, and they're scared that they're going to get their power over us, and they're going to be able to outdo us, but they've got controls on it. What would be like taking those controls away? So the controls are bad, but they're controls. What was Saddam Hussein was a bad guy, but it was worse that he was dead and not in charge now because of what's happened in the aftermath. So yeah, I don't know that that's the right answer. I think that is an idealist answer.
All right. On the other hand, let's take the other side, and that is some are saying we shouldn't do anything about it because we can't do anything about it. Just we should leave and let God sort it out. Because it's his church, it's his body, it's his bride, and so it's up to him to correct. Nothing we can do. What do you think about that thought?
Well, I think that's just the opposite. I mean, a bird can only fly with two wings. So to cut one wing off in spite of the other doesn't make any sense. One is make them all resign. The other is don't do anything. I think that if those are our only two options, then we're not very, very gifted at logical thinking. I was going back and forth with you a few weeks ago. I don't know what happened to that email chain about, what are the minimal doctrines that one has to believe in order to be a part of a group that you would head or something to that extent. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was thinking of those things and I was pointing them. And so I had like just a couple of lines. It wasn't that big. But I really was convicted that at the last line, it had to say, and you will fight evil wherever you see it coming into your space. And to me, that might have even been the most important one. I know I put it last because you've got to put, belief in the one Father. You know what I mean? Like, but man, if we're not all doing that, like that's what the Pope is being accused of. You didn't fight evil when you saw it. You hid evil. So therefore you should not lead what they feel is God's church. So yeah, I think that should we do something? If to me, there's a difference between seeing a brother or sister do a sin, and John talks about this in 1 John, whether it leads to death or not leads to death. He said, look, if you see a brother committing a sin that doesn't lead to death, help try to restore that that sin. But he said, but I don't speak about the things that lead to death. And I've always read that to be, hey, back in the day when we were in charge of ourselves, you would have automatically got stoned to death. Now we're in a different country with different rulers, and maybe everybody who's doing a sin that is supposed to lead to death can't. And so he's like, I'm not even speaking about, I don't even know what you should do there. That's how I've read it. So to me, if somebody's hurting a kid, I don't care if it's my mom or my wife or my best friend, I am going to put a stop to that. And so everybody has that obligation. Now, if you're lifting $50 out of the offering plate and you're the priest and you shouldn't be, I'll probably come to you. I'm not going to send you down to the precinct. And I'm going to be like, man, you're stealing from the Father here. These are people that are giving money to the Father, at least in their mind. So what are you doing? You need to get your head on straight. But if you're hurting a kid, that's where I think that if the answer is, oh, it's God's church, let him sort it out. I think that your study in religion has driven you mad.
Well, I think it's almost tacit belief in Yahad that definitely you're fighting evil, especially when it comes in your space. And we have to remember too that fighting evil is an ongoing battle. It's just not something we're going to get the victory over in one fell swoop usually, unless we get to entire sanctification and perfection. But I don't know anybody that's gotten there yet. Um,
Well, the Church of God has as soon as you're saved, right?
Well, yes. Well, yeah, right. Certain sections of the Church of God with the second and third works of grace, the Holy Spirit, where you can be perfected in this life. Sure. Oh, now I forgot what I was going to say. But the kind of evil you're talking about has to be exposed, whoever it is, just like you said. It has to be exposed because if you find out about it, you're going to be punished for it, if for no other reason than the feelings of guilt you have, because if you're not exposing such things, then you're harboring such things.
Well, yeah, but I mean, even let's forget the moral implications of it. Think about the selfish implications of it. I have kids. I don't want pedophiles walking the street. I was a kid. I didn't want a pedophile coming near me when I was a kid. So for selfish reasons, I should want to put a stop to it, let alone some, superior morality. That's just, some things that you do, you can do good and it's not even going to be accounted to you because you did it for selfish reasons. And so I don't even care if people are standing up and doing it that way. You don't want your kids molested. So if you see a molester, you put a stop to that. I mean, that's the way I look at it.
Okay. I just wrote you a little note, and anybody else, because I'm going to abdicate for just a few minutes. I didn't want to say on here because it'll get recorded.
Nice. Anybody have any questions or comments or any other questions at all? Allyson, you've been quiet today. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I agree with you about fighting evil entirely. I think if you see something that bad and you don't stand up, you just need to. It doesn't matter the cost to you. You need to stand up and take care of it. Do the best you can. That's the right thing to do.
Does anybody think that because you see in the what is called the New Testament, you see different scriptures out of different people's mouths. I mean, Paul definitely comes to mind, but other people as well, where the cowards are not going to have any place in eternal life. Is a function that is so large and evil, and you don't speak up against it or try to fight it in any way you can. Does anybody see that as cowardice or not cowardice, and why?
I think that would depend on your situation in a way. See, I can say it doesn't matter what it costs and jump up and, take things on, but I don't have kids. I don't have people depending on me. I have my mother, but I mean, in worst case, there'd be somebody to take care of her, and, but if you had kids, I could see that, you're protecting others and you might not be able to fight the fight that you wanted to. I don't think it'd be cowardice.
Sure. Yeah, I remember before my son was born, we were praying and trying to have a son and different things, and it didn't seem like it was working. So then somebody, a friend of ours who was raised in a foster family, had a foster sister basically who died, and that lady had 3 kids, and so immediately one family there was a baby, and one family took the baby, and then another family was an old enough kid. One of the kids was older, and he was going to go to one of the cousins' house or something and live there because he had cousins that age. But there was a middle kid who was, I think, like 3 years old, and they didn't know what we were going to do with them. They were going to do with them. So I just said, "Wow, I mean, we've been praying and we haven't been able to get pregnant, and there's a need. Whoever, knows to do good and doesn't do it, to him it is sin, right? So that was my thing. And I said, okay, let's stop trying to get pregnant, because we probably couldn't handle both of them at the same time. But we started stepping up and going to the meetings, and we were like approved. And then we had to go to one final meeting to make sure that everybody was okay with it. And then that kid was going to basically come live with us. And then on the way, and so that went well. And then on the way back from that meeting, like literally like a mile away, we're passing a Walmart, and my wife says, "Hey, stop in here. Let me just do one more pregnancy test." And so she does it. She takes it into Walmart, of all places. She'd hate me if I was telling you this. She knew. And she comes out and she's pregnant. And so at that point in our life, we couldn't do it at that point. Thank Yah that he was able to go to another home, and it worked out smooth and all of that. But I say all that to say that it was a big deal. It was a life-changing thing. It was going to be something to where we had our family. We were trying for a boy, but we weren't going to have a boy. And then this kid who needed to get adopted came along, and it was a big deal. Our minds had to get in, get into that mode of, hey, this is what we're going to do. We have friends now that are older than us that just adopted a little 3-year-old boy, and their kids are all grown. I think they have a senior in high school, but the other 2 are gone. And it's redoing their whole life because this kid needed a family. And if Yah does give a father to the fatherless, he doesn't create that father out of thin air. That father is someone who is called by the name of Yah. That father is someone who is under the umbrella of Yahweh, and Yah we are the hands and the feet that are going to be the father to the fatherless. So in some ways, I agree with you, Allyson. In a lot of ways, I agree with you that, hey, you can't just stand up for every battle, because some battles you just, in certain situations, maybe you could do a battle and I couldn't, or vice versa, because of our living situation. But most of the time, it's not going to be comfortable. It's going to go against the idea of the American dream. If you're going to take someone into your house or something like that, that's a big deal. So it's awkward. It feels exhausting. I know for the family, even that is doing it right now, they're like, man, we were ready to cruise, and now we've got like a 3-year-old in our house, but he needed a family. Like, what are we going to do? Whatever you did to the least of these, you did unto me. So yeah, I think one of the biggest things that keeps us from acting is our American mindset of living the American dream and going on vacation and doing this and doing that and getting the latest entertainment and all of that. I think that's a big factor in why American Christians don't live out the gospel.
Great point. Thank you.
Well, so now what is it that we can do? I mean, you made a suggestion that is really good, I think, because it's biblical, and that is to expose evil. And I think more and more people are looking to the Clementine's homilies and recognitions in order to find the ways to address some of these issues, because there are so many issues addressed in that text, and also in the Epistle of Barnabas. We all should be reading this, because yes, you can ruin your own life, ruin your own reputation. What I have found is the devil goes to great lengths to mess you up afterwards.
Yeah, I agree. I think that some of those that you mentioned, one I like a lot is Second Clement. Just a great sermon. Shepherd of Hermas is you're not going to come out of there feeling holy. I promise you that.
Second Clement, I think, is the best sermon ever written.
It's good.
I've got it recorded if you want to hear it. But I used to go to sleep listening to that sermon over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I mean, it has to be. Well,
In my
it was written by the Pope's brother and ascribed to Clement, but I don't know if
I think that First Clement to me is the one that is the least authentic. First Clement reads like a Pauline epistle. It's not Clement. It's not. Everybody says First Clement is Clement and Second Clement isn't. I think it's the exact opposite. But that's just my opinion. But First or Second Clement, like he said, the Barnabas. I'll tell you another really great book if you have not read to get the mind of a prophetic, apocalyptic, messianic, on point. Like it seems like it was written. It had to have been written after Yeshua was on the earth, especially since he's called by name in there. But it wasn't. It was around before that's Second Esdras. If you haven't read Second Esdras, oh man, that thing will absolutely light you up. Another one I love is what's the prophet that was with David? Gad the seer. Read Gad the seer. It reads like a post Yeshua book, but it's the Chronicles of Gad the seer with King David. Just there's so many things where it just gives you a different perspective than the 21st century Bible bookstore perspective. Like, yeah, you read those, you're not going to get those in the Bible bookstore. And you've done a lot of those, haven't you, Jackson?
We have all those things, plus commentaries in our library, both in audio and in textual form. And many of those that we have in textual form are reconstructions with reconstructed language as well. So this is one of the great things that we have as a Yahad, is a library full of ancient texts, many of which were well known by the Catholics when the canon was put together, but excused from the canon for one reason or the other, and then called on to be destroyed. And even now you read a generic copy of Barnabas, and the commentator will say that that pseudo-Barnabas wrote this in order to break away from Judaism. How in the world they can get that from this book? Only through the churchy translation. Some of these books had to be retranslated. That's one of them. That it's clear in the original language what is being said there, but when you replace the original words with churchy words of today, it's like it comes right out of off beside the hymn book in the church, in the back of the church pew. You got to read them or listen to them in new translations, and yes, that's what we have, including God the Seer. We have a full commentary on that particular book from when it just first came out, I don't know, 2-3 years ago. Maybe not that long ago, but you're right about that. There's so much good in ancient literature. It's almost like I went to the Goodwill yesterday, looking in the books. Once in a while you'll find a gem in there. But what I find the most of, the genre, is contemporary Christian books, pietist books, books on how to get what you want or how to pray better. But it seems to me that the ancient books, when they're correctly translated and hooked up with the Nazarene faith, are by far the best because they come right to the point. And not only that, but they elucidate the words of Yeshua a lot more accurately because, well, these people knew him or were close to him or were part of the 120, like Barnabas.
Right. And people will go to the Bible bookstore and read, Osteen's Your Best Life Now or 7 Keys to Financial Prosperity, but won't pick up a book that is supposedly written by or about the sermons of Peter or Barnabas or Clement. Hey, you got to be out of your mind. That's my thoughts. Who is that guy in your picture, Jackson? Is that a Russian double agent?
That was a selfie I took, let's see, 8 years ago. That's what I really look like underneath.
I like seeing pictures of people when they're younger because it lets me see how they view themselves when they're speaking to me. You can see somebody who's 85, 90, but you don't see how they feel inside. They feel like they're 25, 30. And so I like to see an older picture of them.
Well, I'll just mention one other book, a contemporary book that just came out. And of course, that's Robert Eisenman's new book about the freeing of the Dead Sea Scrolls. When he says the Essenes are not even involved in this whole scroll business, and Allyson, you'd be able to do this better than I, but what I'm getting to now, about third, fourth chapter, is his recognition of the Dead Sea Scroll type literature, the apocalyptic literature, as being the original messianic Judaism of the first century. I think that will cause a huge paradigm shift in our minds, but I think he's got to be right there.
Is he going kind of the same? I haven't read it yet. Is he going kind of the same way as Rachel Elior?
Well, no, I don't think so, because Rachel has quite a different idea about the origination of the scrolls, but Allyson Gary is on here, and she said that well, if you don't mind me saying so, she's feeling a little bit funny about being called an Essene because of what he says in the book regarding the Essenes. But perhaps, Allyson, if you're there, you could say a little about his idea of what messianics at that time were. It's like the messianics of that time were exactly what we want to be at this time when you talk about us being in a continuous, ongoing war with evil.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, they were wanting to get back to what the faith was supposed to be. I think and this isn't necessarily in the book. This is just what I have from it. They were sick of the wickedness in the government. They were sick of the wickedness that the people were being led to, and they wanted. He says that he thinks they were more like Sicarii Essenes than the friendly kind, because you look at all their stuff like the War Scroll. They were looking for a pending battle of the forces of light versus the forces of darkness. And, I think there's parallels to our time there, and they were looking for their Messiah to come, to be the conquering Messiah. And they were apocalyptic in that they thought it was game on very soon because of the state of the world. So, yeah, I agree. That's something that, draws me to it, because I see all the same things in the world at this time.
Well, one of the things, too, is that, when we have our three descriptions of what Essenes are from Pliny, from Philo, and then from Josephus. And from their description, and from what we can tell from the Qumran community, I don't see those lining up exactly, which I think is where Rachel Elior goes with it, that she doesn't think the Essenes were in Qumran. She thinks that's another group. And so that's why I was asking about what is he doing? Is it similar to hers? And maybe it's from a different perspective, but he's saying maybe...
he thinks they were zealots.
Right, zealots, and they were the first messianics.
Right, and the zealotry may have developed into the assassin sort of zealots as, later on. Maybe at first at Qumran, they were just saying, let's separate ourselves, let's, try to persuade the government to, and the priesthood government, because that's what it was, to turn back away from all this stuff. And if we'll just stay away from it, we'll separate like our ancestors did, and we'll go back to the original practices and faith and be more pure. And that, I think he's implying that as time went on, they went to actual
Well, right. I mean,
against
you
people.
do.
Well, look
Yes,
at Acts
you do.
21, where it tells us you've got Paul in Jerusalem the last time that we know of, and he's being led around by those of James, I think the elders, and it's either the elders or James himself says, look at all those. There are thousands that are zealous for the Torah. Right there
Yeah.
tells us who they are. They are zealots, but they're ostensibly zealots for the Torah. And you're right. Just like this movement today, I mean, even Christians see some horrible apocalypse coming, some great war. They misinterpret Revelation and other things to see a great war here, yet they don't have the underpinnings on why there would be one.
Right.
Another thing that we have to remember is, I believe that there is one bridge between the New Testament and the Qumran literature that you must cross over if you're going to see, and that is the Epistle to the Hebrews. That is the bridge between New Testament and Qumran, especially the Qumran thought that Melchizedek was coming back to do the very things that Yahshua did do, to bring back Torah, to upend evil, and to have a kingdom. And Hebrews and 11Q13, the coming of Melchizedek, those two together form the bridge that shows us that, well, the writer of Hebrews is trying to convince the zealots that Yeshua is the one they're looking for, and he is the Melchizedek. And that was so powerful to learn about that with me. Actually, I was in a Baptist Sunday school class, and they were studying the Hebrews, and the teacher said, well, what does this have to say to us Christians today? It was written to us. And my comment was, no, it wasn't. It's written to the Hebrews. Who are the Hebrews? And then to connect with what's written there, with what's written in the text, the second coming of Melchizedek, I couldn't get that far to show them, because like it was the next week, the pastor came and said, you're done. He said, well, I'm only trying to show the historical truth and proof here of a connection. He said, the deacon said, we're not interested in history here. We're interested in learning Baptist theology. I think that is almost a ubiquitous understanding for church people. But see, if a person is going to be blind, deaf, and dumb to opportunities to learn more or to extend themselves some, then these types of calamities in the church are bound to happen, because the people in the church, including bishops, just never get any farther. The thing about being a bridge over to the Essene documents, what the Essene documents are, so-called Essene documents, they're all concerned with purity and holiness and the right way to do things, mainly in the milieu of the temple, but still there is an awful lot there that can appeal to us and our lives that we're missing altogether. Is anybody still there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, everybody disappeared here. All right. Now I'll shut up.
All right. Any other questions or comments or anything before we shut it down? Any thoughts on that or anything else?
Nope, all good. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a very interesting program today. Good job, everybody. Thanks.
Seemed really short, didn't it?
Yeah.
Well, let's go on with it then next week. What do you say, Rich?
Yeah, that's fine. We can continue. We got, even if we have a couple more sources. I know I led it astray from the Catholic thing.
That's all right. Maybe we could look at some of these scroll sources.
Right. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Thank you all for coming.